Hey, hey you, listening right now. Yeah, you, the one everyone swore was just regular. Come closer for a second. You ever notice how people get real comfortable putting you in that tiny little box they built in their heads? Like they swear they've already decoded you. Like you're some easy-to-read manual they skimmed once and decided, yup, predictable. They walk around, acting like your entire destiny was written on your face, as if you didn't have whole galaxies tucked behind your silence. And you let them think that, didn't you? You let them misjudge you, underestimate you, dismiss you. You played along with their, oh, they're just normal narrative, because, why would you spend energy proving anything to people who never planned to clap for you in the first place? And that's the part they never understood about you. You weren't quiet because you were weak. You were quiet because you were loading. See, people get nervous around mystery. They get nervous when they can't read you. But instead of admitting they felt threatened by your potential, they tried to convince themselves you were harmless, average, safe. They thought you were the kind of person who would always stay where they left you. Someone who would watch other people win, nod politely, and call it a day. Someone who wouldn't dare shift the ground beneath their feet. But, then came that moment, your moment, when something in you just snapped into alignment. That switch flipped. That internal lock clicked. That quiet voice inside went, yeah, rise. And suddenly you weren't moving like them anymore. You weren't thinking like them anymore. You weren't even playing the same game they thought you were playing. You evolved while they weren't looking, and when you came back, you didn't walk back in as the version they remembered. You walked in as the version they never imagined they'd have to deal with. You went God tier, and it shook their entire nervous system. Because when a person shifts from background character to main event, everybody who underestimated them gets exposed in HD. They don't just get surprised, they get embarrassed. Watching you grow forced them to face the truth. They weren't ignoring someone ordinary. They were ignoring someone dangerous, someone rare, someone built for levels they couldn't even visualize. Your glow didn't just threaten them, it detonated their comfort zone. And, you know what really messed them up? The fact that you didn't announce the transformation. You didn't warn them. You didn't post a countdown. You didn't tell them, watch me. You just became. One day they looked over and there you were, operating on a frequency they didn't even know existed, doing things they had spent their whole lives telling themselves were impossible, making moves with precision, clarity, depth, and execution they couldn't match if you handed them step-by-step instructions. Your elevation wasn't loud, but the impact? Oh, it echoed. And their ambition? It couldn't handle it. They wanted to keep up, but every time they tried, they felt that burn in their chest, that panic, that why am I not enough spiral. They tried to imitate your confidence, but imitation cracks fast when the original is powered by purpose. They tried to chase your path, but running in circles doesn't count as progress. They tried to mirror your energy, but your energy wasn't coming from aesthetics. It was coming from truth, pain, discipline, transformation, and a level of self-awareness they've never dared to touch. Watching you ascend didn't just discourage them. It self-destructed the illusions they had about themselves. You became the walking contradiction to their excuses. You became the proof that the barriers they swore were impossible were actually just comfortable lies. You became the reminder that the only thing separating them from evolution was their refusal to confront themselves. And that's why they started acting weird, right? That's why the energy shifted. That's why the compliments got thinner and the shade got thicker. That's why people who never cared about your journey suddenly had a lot to say about your destination. Because when you went God tier, you forced them to face the one truth they never wanted to see. You weren't the one who was normal. They were, and they resented you for breaking that symmetry. See, people love fairness until the scoreboard flips. People love balance until they're the ones behind. People love we're all the same until one person in the room decides to stop shrinking. You stopped shrinking. And once you stop shrinking, once you stop apologizing for your potential, once you stop dimming your own light because someone else fears the reflection, there's no going back. You hit a tier of self-understanding that rewrites your entire internal code. You start seeing patterns, motives, strategies, and projections for what they are. You stop chasing approval from people who haven't grown since last decade. You stop negotiating your worth like it's a garage sale bargain. And they felt that shift hard. Because your transformation didn't just change your life. It changed the power dynamic. You became the storm they didn't prepare for. You became the chapter in their story they never wanted to read. You became the exception to every limiting belief they used to justify their own stagnation. And, here's the part that really stings them. You didn't even do it to beat them. You did it because you finally chose yourself. That's what God tier is, by the way. Not arrogance, not ego, not theatrics. It's clarity. Clarity that you're not here to match their expectations. Clarity that you're not here to audition for their approval. Clarity that your life is too big, too deep, too divine to be lived at the level of people who fear growth. And the moment you embraced that clarity, their ambition folded on itself like cheap paper in the rain. Because what's imitation next to authenticity? What's envy next to execution? What's noise next to transformation? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You didn't become a different person. You became the person you were supposed to be all along. And everyone who underestimated you got front row seats to a revelation they didn't know they were paying for. And, the wildest part is that every step you took upward started exposing things you weren't even trying to expose. People began revealing their real intentions without you having to ask a single question. Their tone shifted, their energy stuttered, their confidence cracked a little every time you walked into a room, because they could feel it. This new version of you wasn't bending anymore. This wasn't the normal you they were banking on. This was the you that finally realized you didn't need anyone's permission to evolve. And once you started moving with that kind of internal authority, everything around you started rearranging itself. You ever notice that? Like you take one honest step into your own potential, and suddenly the air in your life changes. People who used to talk over you stop making eye contact. People who used to give you half respect start stuttering around their own words. People who used to laugh at your dreams get real quiet when those dreams start getting loud, because your presence started saying things before your mouth even opened. Your confidence walked in 3 seconds before your body did. Your energy wasn't asking for validation. It was commanding space just by existing. And the people who once thought they had you figured out didn't know how to handle that. They thought your glow-up would be cosmetic. They thought it would be surface level. They didn't expect a spiritual rewrite. They didn't expect a mental hard reset. They didn't expect you to rebuild yourself from the core outward, like you were installing an entirely new operating system. That's what God tier really is. It's when your mind stops playing on beginner difficulty, while everyone else is still bragging about beating the tutorial. You stopped checking who was watching, who was doubting, who was whispering, because you finally understood something they're terrified to admit. Your evolution isn't up for negotiation, and once that clicked in you, their world started glitching. Because the second a person stops needing external approval, the people who relied on controlling them lose all their leverage. Their ambition didn't just crumble, it malfunctioned. They couldn't keep up with your pace, your insight, your adaptability. They couldn't mirror you because they didn't have what you had powering your shift. Truth, purpose, experience, hunger, resilience. You started walking with that quiet, I know who I am energy. The kind of energy that doesn't scream, it radiates. The kind of energy that doesn't brag, it demonstrates. The kind of energy that doesn't argue. It makes people rethink their entire personality. And, the beauty of this whole thing is that you didn't ascend to spite them. You ascended because you were finally tired of lowering your vibration to match environments that couldn't host your expansion. You got tired of pretending you were small. You got tired of explaining depth to people built for shallow waters. You got tired of waiting for people who weren't even trying to move. Your growth wasn't an attack. It was an awakening. But to them it felt like a threat. To them it felt like betrayal. To them it felt like you broke an unspoken contract, the one where you stay beneath them to keep their insecurities warm. And that's why their ambition self-destructed the way it did. Because your rise didn't give them permission to stay the same. It forced them to confront everything they never had the courage to fix. Every excuse, every comfort zone, every lie they told themselves to avoid change. Watching you elevate was like watching their reflection age 10 years in 10 seconds. It was like someone pressed skip on their self-delusion playlist. It was like life itself tapped them on the shoulder and whispered, "Look, this is what you could have been if you didn't run from your own potential." And, that's when you started hearing the subtle desperation in their attempts to regain control. The little jabs disguised as jokes, the backhanded compliments, the sudden urgency to correct you, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, you'd slip back into the version of yourself that was easier for them to digest. But you didn't. You kept rising, not loudly, not aggressively, just consistently. And nothing terrifies a stagnant mind more than consistency. Nothing rattles an insecure person more than someone who just doesn't stop. Nothing scrambles a jealous spirit more than someone who levels up again and again without making noise about it. Your existence became the reminder they tried to avoid. Your progress became the mirror they refused to stand in front of. Your aura became the audit of their excuses. And, the funniest part, you weren't even in competition with them. They put themselves in a race you weren't running. They tried to outdo a version of you that no longer existed. They tried to surpass a standard you had already outgrown. Every time you evolved, their outdated ambition lagged a little more behind, glitching like a device stuck on 1% battery. Every time you upgraded, their systems scrambled, trying to keep up with a blueprint they didn't understand. Every time you stepped into deeper authenticity, their imitation cracked in places they couldn't repair. And the truth they'll never admit, not even to themselves, is that your greatness didn't intimidate them because they hated you. It intimidated them because it reminded them of who they're afraid to become. And, it's almost hilarious how their whole internal storyline started collapsing the moment you stopped dimming your own. Like once you stepped into that version of yourself you'd been quietly building in the background, their confidence didn't just dip, it free fell. You became living proof that the limits they swore were just the way life works, were actually just the ceiling they refused to break through. And every move you made after that, every risk you took, every shift you embraced, every upgrade you installed into your own mindset, kept pushing them deeper into that uncomfortable realization. Because you weren't supposed to outgrow the environment they left you in. You weren't supposed to evolve past the expectations they had for you. You weren't supposed to make their old predictions look foolish, but you did all of that without even trying to embarrass them. You just grew. And growth is the one thing a lot of people claim they want, until someone close to them actually does it. Then suddenly their smiles feel forced, their praise gets shorter, their energy becomes heavier, because your evolution exposes their stagnation, not publicly, not loudly, but internally. In those private little corners of their minds, they avoid cleaning out. You ever feel that shift? That moment when you realize the room hasn't changed, but you have? That moment when you walk into a familiar space and everything feels a little smaller because you're not the same size internally anymore. That's the moment your spirit and your identity started expanding faster than their comfort zones could stretch. And the people who once thought they were ahead of you, those same people who used to move with that subtle superiority, yeah, they felt the gap closing. Then they felt it flipping. Then they felt it widening in the opposite direction. And nothing messes up a person's ambition more than realizing the one they underestimated is suddenly the one setting the pace. They weren't inspired by your rise because inspiration requires humility. They weren't motivated by your progress because motivation requires honesty. They weren't elevated by your example because elevation requires letting go of ego. Instead, they panicked. Their ambition didn't just crumble, it malfunctioned. Every move they made after you leveled up felt reactive, rushed, unplanned. They were scrambling to match a version of you they still didn't understand. Because you weren't growing for show. You weren't evolving for applause. You weren't leveling up because someone dared you. You were doing it because something in you whispered, it's time. And once that whisper became a direction, everything in your life started restructuring around that new truth. Your habits shifted, your clarity sharpened, your purpose became louder than other people's opinions. You stopped stretching yourself thin, trying to fit into spaces that were never built to hold the full version of you. You stopped explaining your plans to people who never saw your value to begin with. You stopped seeking validation from voices that never spoke from love in the first place. Your transformation wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. It wasn't flashy, but it was seismic. It wasn't rehearsed, but it was inevitable. And that inevitability, it haunted them, because watching you ascend forced them to confront the brutal truth. Their ambition wasn't rooted in growth. It was rooted in wanting to be better than you. And the second your glow made that impossible, the whole structure of their confidence collapsed. Their ambition self-destructed because it was never built on self-awareness. It was built on comparison, competition, insecurity. You became the mirror that didn't lie. You became the measuring stick they couldn't manipulate. You became the chapter they couldn't skip. And the more you elevated, the more they spiraled. Not because you hurt them, but because your evolution forced them to feel the weight of everything they refused to heal. And, that's when you really started to notice how the world responds to someone who finally drops their fear. Your silence started carrying authority. Your decisions started carrying weight. Your presence started shifting atmospheres before you even said a word. People began treating you differently, not because you bragged, but because you stopped apologizing. You stepped into that God-tier energy, not by trying to be above anyone, but by finally being aligned with yourself. And nothing destabilizes someone's unearned confidence more than seeing the person they misjudged walk with that level of internal certainty. That kind of clarity makes people rethink their whole identity, their whole strategy, their whole story about you. You became the plot twist. The kind of plot twist that flips a whole narrative on its head. The kind that forces everyone to admit, either privately or publicly, that they had you all wrong. And, the funniest thing is how you could actually feel their internal narrative glitching every time you walked into a room after that shift. Not because you were acting different in some dramatic way, but because your energy wasn't asking for permission anymore. You weren't waiting to be chosen, approved, validated. You weren't shrinking yourself to make anybody comfortable. You were just being fully, unedited, unfiltered, unapologetic. And that version of you, the one moving with quiet certainty, became their biggest psychological earthquake. They kept double-checking you with their eyes like, is this really the same person? But yeah, it was you. Just not the version they built in their imagination. This was the you that no longer needed their narrative to survive. This was the you that wasn't holding back out of politeness or fear. This was the you that finally realized your potential was never meant to be compressed into their storyline. And the moment you started living outside their expectations, their whole sense of superiority started unraveling. Not gradually, not gently, but instantly, like someone yanked the power cord out of their confidence. Because they used to rely on believing they were ahead of you to feel like they were ahead in life. Your quietness made them feel secure. Your hesitation made them feel elevated. Your uncertainty made them feel like their path was the right one. But once you stepped into alignment, it was like you teleported to a level they didn't even know existed. And that's when the envy hit them. But not the loud, obvious kind. This was the subtle envy, the quiet envy. The kind that leaks through micro-expressions, tone shifts, awkward compliments that feel off, long pauses before they respond to your wins. Because deep down, they weren't comparing progress anymore. They were comparing identity. And identity is a battle they couldn't win. Your internal world expanded faster than their imagination. Your decisions started coming from depth instead of fear. Your moves started coming from conviction instead of needing approval. And every time they tried to imitate that confidence, it cracked in their hands like cheap glass. Because your rise wasn't a performance, it was a metamorphosis. And, here's the part nobody tells you. When you evolve out of survival mode into creation mode, the people who were comfortable watching you struggle suddenly don't know their role anymore. They don't know where to place you in their hierarchy because you're not playing the same script. You're not reacting how you used to. You're not giving them access to your insecurities. You're not predictable. You're not small. And that unpredictability, it terrifies them more than anything. People can handle your weakness. People can handle your humility. People can even handle your temporary wins. But the moment you start operating from self-awareness instead of self-doubt, everything shifts. Because self-awareness is the real God tier. It's the upgrade they can't download. Good day to all of you watching. Yeah, you, the one who just walked out of that courtroom looking like you accidentally rewrote the entire family history with a single breath. Because, wow. The audacity you moved with in that inheritance fight? The nerve you had to finally stand there, in front of people who spent years underestimating you, and just handle business like that? Yeah, that's what we're talking about today. You don't even realize what you did. You walked into a space where entire bloodlines crumble under pressure, and you didn't blink. You walked into a war disguised as a legal proceeding, a place where every relative pretended to wish you well, while drafting emotional hit pieces in their head, and you kept your cool. And, the judge, yeah, in awe. Not because you had the loudest voice, not because you had the fanciest lawyer, but because you walked in with that quiet, razor-sharp confidence that only comes from surviving things nobody else knows about. See, people don't get it. They look at the outcome, family in ruins, and they whisper like you caused some grand catastrophe. But deep down, you know the truth. It was already broken. You just stopped pretending. And that takes guts most people will never touch. You spent years being the one who should stay quiet, the one they underestimated, the one they tried to keep out of the room because they knew if you ever spoke up, the whole house of cards would fall. And then, today, you spoke up. You didn't just speak up, actually. You carved your name into the room. You made every single person present rethink the version of you they built in their head. You know what kind of emotional intelligence it takes to sit there, listening to relatives twist stories, rewrite memories, weaponize their own embarrassment, all while you sit steady, breathing slow, knowing every word you deliver hits like a truth bomb wrapped in composure. That's not luck. That's not chance. That's a transformation, one you earned the hard way. Because somewhere along the line, you realized something terrifyingly liberating. You don't owe anyone the broken version of yourself they're comfortable with. And, that's the part that rattled them. That's the part that cracked the family tree. Not the court case, not the decision, not the inheritance. It was the moment you stopped shrinking. People act shocked when you stop playing small, right? Like, whoa, who told you to have boundaries? Who allowed you to speak with certainty? Who said you could outgrow the narrative we trapped you in? Funny thing is, nobody told you. You figured it out alone. And the judge saw that. Not the money, not the fight, the self-possession, the kind that only shows up in people who've been doubted, dismissed, and underestimated for way too long. You carried yourself like someone who finally realized the room needs them more than they need the room. You answered questions like someone who stopped apologizing for existing. You looked at all those familiar faces, those family members who counted on you to fall apart, and you didn't flinch because, you knew what they didn't. You weren't walking in there to prove yourself. You were walking in there to claim what always had your name on it. That's the part that broke them, not your presence, your growth, your clarity, your refusal to fold. And yeah, they're in ruins emotionally because they witnessed something they weren't prepared for. The version of you that refuses to be manipulated ever again. And let's not pretend you didn't feel that shift. The moment you spoke, the entire room recalibrated. People sat up straighter, eyes widened, voices dropped. Because suddenly, you weren't the one being questioned. You were the one setting the tone. You know how terrifying that is for people who relied on your silence. How destabilizing it is to realize the person they tried to frame as the weak one just became the anchor of the entire narrative. That's why the energy shifted. That's why the air felt heavy. That's why every pair of eyes drifted back to you again and again, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. You didn't just win a case. You confronted every lie ever told about you. And you dismantled them one sentence at a time. And inside, deeper than you want to admit, you felt something waking up. That fierce, calm part of you that's tired of surviving and finally ready to live. Because this wasn't about money, wasn't about property, wasn't about documents. It was about reclaiming every inch of identity they stripped away while smiling in your face. You walked out of that courtroom today with something far more valuable than inheritance. Self-respect sharpened into power. The judge saw it, the room felt it, and your family? They finally realized the one truth they spent years trying to avoid. You didn't become stronger, you just stopped pretending you were weak. And once a person reaches that point, once they taste that level of self-possession, that depth of emotional armor, that clarity of, I'm done being underestimated, there is no version of reality where they ever go back to being small. Right. Because, you could feel it the second you stepped into the hallway afterward. That weird mix of silence and shock following you like a shadow that finally realized it can't overpower the person casting it anymore. You didn't rush. You didn't scramble. You walked with that steady, grounded rhythm that only comes after someone has finally reclaimed territory inside themselves that was stolen a long time ago. And people noticed. Oh, they noticed in that uncomfortable, throat-tightening way where they don't even know what to say. Because anything they say would expose the version of you they were secretly hoping would fail. But you didn't give them that version. You gave them the you that's been slowly forming in the background, quietly absorbing every betrayal, every side-eye, every snide family comment dressed up as concern, every whispered conversation you weren't supposed to hear, every moment they thought you'd fold, all of it, layered into the backbone you walked in therewith. And the wildest part? You didn't even raise your voice. You didn't have to. There's a different kind of authority that shows up when someone knows exactly who they are and exactly what they deserve. And you tapped into that without forcing it. You know how rare that is. People spend their whole lives trying to fake that kind of energy, trying to rehearse it, mirror it, imitate it. You lived it. You earned it through nights nobody saw, choices nobody understood, healing nobody clapped for. And that's why the judge kept glancing at you, like you were rewriting the emotional temperature of the room. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition. The kind professionals have when they witness someone carrying pain with elegance instead of bitterness. And, your family? Yeah, you could practically hear the emotional cracks spreading through them as they realized you weren't playing the part they always assigned to you. It's unsettling, seeing the person they underestimated standing fully in their truth. It ruins the roles they built their identity around. It ruins the hierarchy they depended on. It ruins the narrative where you're the one who should apologize, or sacrifice, or stay quiet to keep the peace. Peace wasn't peace. It was suppression. and you finally stopped signing those invisible contracts. You ever notice how people act when they can't use guilt to manipulate you anymore? Their smiles get tighter, their tone gets shaky, their arguments get desperate. Because when guilt stops working, the entire system falls apart. That's what they felt today. That terrifying realization that the version of you they controlled emotionally is gone, replaced by someone who won't negotiate their worth ever again. And the thing that makes your transformation so unsettling for them is that you didn't fight dirty. You fought clean, transparent, fearless, grounded. You answered with clarity. You held your posture. You kept your breathing steady. You showed emotional intelligence they never expected because they mistook your compassion for fragility. But compassion is not fragility. Compassion with boundaries is power. And that's what you walked in there carrying like an invisible crown. And, you could feel it too, right? That subtle hum under your skin, like some deeper part of you was waking up, stretching, reminding you it's been here the whole time. You just weren't allowed to meet it. The courtroom didn't build that strength. It just exposed it. It forced the real you onto the stage, the version of you that doesn't scramble for validation or shrink for anyone's approval. The version of you that understands silence can be a weapon, and truth, delivered calmly, is louder than anger ever could be. That's why the atmosphere shifted every time you took a breath. That's why their arguments started folding in on themselves. That's why their confidence cracked. Not because you were aggressive, but because you were unshakable. And, there's something profoundly empowering, almost dangerous in a liberating way, about realizing you don't fear the room anymore. You don't fear the whispers. You don't fear the judge's eyes on you. You don't fear the weight of speaking the truth. You don't fear being misunderstood by people who never tried to understand you anyway. You walked in there carrying years of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, and you walked out carrying a different story entirely. A story where you're no longer the emotional mule of the family, or the one expected to forgive everything, or the one expected to shrink because your light exposes their shadows. And yeah, the ruins they're sitting in, those aren't your ruins. Those are the ruins of their illusions. The illusions that kept them comfortable while you suffered quietly. The illusions that helped them sleep at night while you tried to rebuild yourself from scraps they didn't even know they broke. You didn't destroy anything. You revealed everything. And, once a person reveals the truth with that level of courage, once they understand their own power in a room filled with people who tried to strip them of it, once they stand tall, with nothing but their integrity holding them upright, there's no version of the story where they ever go back to pretending they're powerless. Because, once that version of you steps forward, the one you didn't even know you were crafting through every disappointment and every quiet comeback, it doesn't slip back into the shadows just because the paperwork is done, or the court doors close behind you. You can feel that, right? That steady pulse under your ribs, like your own spirit tapping you on the shoulder, saying, "Yeah, that was me. I've been here." You finally listened. And you're walking through that hallway, those cold tiles, that weird echo as you move, while every relative pretends not to look at you, even though their eyes keep flinching in your direction. Because, they don't know what to call you anymore. They can't call you the weak one, can't call you the quiet one, can't call you the easy-to-guilt one. Your growth forced them into a rebrand they didn't approve, and it's written all over their silence, and you felt that space open up inside you. right in your chest, where the fear used to live. It's just gone. Evicted, like the courtroom became the final eviction notice for every version of you that was shaped by their disrespect. You ever notice how heavy your breathing gets after you survive something emotional that's been sitting on your shoulders for years? That slow exhale you didn't even know you were holding. Yeah, that's the moment your body registers the truth. You're not being carried by pain anymore. You're being carried by clarity. And, the clarity hits you like, oh, wait, I'm actually allowed to protect myself. Oh, I don't need their approval to exist. Oh, I'm not the villain for refusing to be manipulated. That's when everything shifts. That's when you realize your entire life you've been operating from survival mode. And this, today, was the first day you acted from power. And it shows in the way you walk, not louder, not cockier, just grounded, accurate. Aligned with yourself in a way they've never seen before because you used to contort yourself just to keep everyone comfortable. But, look at you now. You're not bending, you're not shrinking, you're not making yourself emotionally palatable to people who never considered your feelings anyway. You gave them the truth, unpackaged, unperformed, unfiltered, and it rattled every fake foundation they built their entitlement on. That's why they're uncomfortable, not because of the outcome, because of the mirror you held up without even lifting your hand. You ever realize how deeply unsettling it is for people when the person they used to dismiss suddenly becomes the emotional center of gravity in the room? Everyone starts overthinking. Everyone starts questioning what else you've noticed, what else you've internalized, what else you've survived quietly. And, survival looks different when you stop apologizing for it. It becomes a skill, a strength, a language only people who've been through real chaos understand. You didn't walk out of that courtroom as someone who won. You walked out as someone who outgrew, someone who broke the emotional chain that kept them tied to people who thought you'd forever be small enough to manipulate. And the thing that keeps echoing, louder than the judge's gavel, louder than your relatives' whispers, is that grounded certainty rising in your chest like, I didn't just show up, I showed who I really am. And, that's the part that's going to follow you after today. Into your conversations, into your boundaries, into your decisions, into the way you sit in rooms that once intimidated you, into the way you breathe when people speak over you, into the way you don't flinch when someone tries testing your strength. This isn't courtroom confidence. This is identity confidence. The kind that doesn't depend on winning or validation or applause. The kind that grows when you finally realize your value was never up for debate. You were just surrounded by people who benefited from pretending it was, and, that realization hits differently. It rearranges the entire architecture of how you see yourself. It strengthens your voice without raising its volume. It steadies your hands without forcing a performance. It softens your heart without making it vulnerable to the same old wounds. You're not the same person who walked in earlier. You feel it. Anyone watching you feels it. Even the people pretending not to watch feel it. There's a stillness in you now, but not the quiet of suppression. The quiet of someone who finally knows their own power and doesn't need to announce it. And, that's the version of you that's stepping into the next room, the next conversation, the next chapter, carrying a level of emotional authority that can't be faked, borrowed, or stolen. Because, you can feel that edge forming inside you, right? Not an angry edge, not some wild chaos. You're past that. This is that animus morphosis level clarity, the kind that comes after you've stared down the whole room and realized nobody in it can control you anymore. It's subtle at first, almost like a vibration under your skin, this awareness that you're finally awake. Not in the dramatic way people romanticize, but in that painfully honest way where you look at your past reactions and think, wow, I was holding back a version of myself they weren't ready for. And stepping out of that courtroom, every step you take feels like it's carrying a new directive written into your bones. The directive that says you're done performing for people who never cared whether the performance drained you. You ever notice how the world looks different the moment you stop needing approval? Colors feel sharper. Voices sound smaller. Your own thoughts finally have space to stretch out and breathe. That's what's happening in you. That emotional oxygen you've been starving for, you're finally inhaling it without guilt. And your family, standing there in their shock, pretending to scroll through their phones or shuffle papers they don't even understand. They feel it too. They feel that shift, that heavy realization that you're no longer the emotional sponge they once wrung dry. Their eyes couldn't meet yours for more than a second. Did you notice? Not out of disrespect, out of fear of recognition, fear that if they held your gaze too long, they'd see the truth staring back, that you've outgrown their version of you in ways they can't rewrite. You didn't walk out looking for validation. You walked out carrying truth, like a weapon that doesn't need swinging. You carried yourself like someone who watched the whole structure of family politics crumble and didn't flinch, because somewhere deep down, you always knew the foundation was rotten. And that's the part that gives you that Joker-style energy. Not chaos, but understanding. That unsettling mix of empathy and detachment, that I see everything clearly now, and I'm not scared of any of it vibe. People misunderstand that energy. They think it's darkness, but it's not. It's freedom, the kind of freedom that comes from finally understanding the game, the players, the rules, and realizing you don't have to play any of it. You respond differently when you're free. You move slower, more intentionally. You look at people with that soft half smile that says, I know what you're trying to do, and it doesn't work on me anymore. That's the part that rattles them the most. Not your voice, not your confidence, your calm, your emotional detachment, your refusal to dance in the drama they choreographed, and your family, the ones who thought they understood every emotional switch inside you. They don't know where the switchboard is anymore. They don't know what triggers you. They don't know what scares you. They don't know what motivates you, because you rewired yourself. And you did it quietly, privately, without permission. You can see it in the way they shuffle around you, like they're walking around a new monument, but don't know which angle is safe to look at. Like they're searching for the old version of you and can't find a trace. And the deeper truth. They're not just shocked by the case outcome. They're shocked by your transformation. The inheritance was paper. You were the earthquake. You didn't just handle that court fight. You dismantled every emotional assumption they ever used to keep you manageable. You walked in with years of swallowed pain and walked out with power finally sitting on your tongue instead of guilt. And once you taste that kind of power, the authentic kind, the earned kind, the world starts rearranging itself around you. Not because you're trying to dominate it, but because people can't help recalibrating when someone shows them what unfiltered self-respect looks like. The animus in you, the symbolic one, The psychological one, not the clown, not the chaos, but the unmasked observer. That part of you is finally awake. That part of you is watching everything and everyone with a new lens, a new level of emotional literacy, a new kind of backbone that can't be bribed by comfort or crushed by pressure. And the frightening beauty of this moment is that you're just getting started if you want. I can keep extending this energy even deeper into your rise, exploring the psychological shift, the new identity forming, and the unsettling poise you're stepping into. Hey, you. Yeah, you watching this right now. Lean in for a second, because, I've got something wild to tell you, something nobody else is brave enough to say out loud. You're sitting there asking yourself, this info was locked behind clearance levels, so how the hell did it end up in my hands? And here's the part that gets everybody shaking. You weren't supposed to have it, not according to them, not according to the gatekeepers, the decision makers, the ones who pretend the world only moves when they press the buttons. But somehow, you, specifically you ended up holding something they swore you'd never even see. And the funny thing is, they can't explain it. They don't understand how you slipped through cracks they thought didn't exist. They spent years building walls, layers, clearance codes, passwords, whole security protocols, and you walked right through them like they were wet tissue. You know what that means? It means there's something about you that terrifies them, something they underestimated so badly, it's almost laughable. Something they can't categorize, can't file into their little system, can't predict with their data models and background checks. And that something is this: you don't follow their hierarchy, because deep down, you know you weren't built for it. See, people like them, they worship order. They love rules, love titles, love structures that make them feel safe and in control. But you're the anomaly they didn't code for, the outlier they didn't prepare for, the glitch that refuses to crash. You got your hands on restricted info. Because whether you realize it or not, you operate on a wavelength most people never even tune into. You move differently, you observe differently. You connect dots others can't even see. And, they're watching you now. Oh yeah, trust me. They're watching the same way someone stares at a puzzle piece that doesn't fit any known puzzle. Because the moment that file landed in your possession, your whole life shifted. You crossed an invisible threshold. You stepped into a territory where only the brave, the damaged, the hungry, the stubborn survive. You know how many people get access to something like that? Almost none. Because they're predictable. They follow directions. They stay in their assigned lanes like good little citizens. But you hit a point in your life where you stopped waiting for permission, where you realized nobody was coming to approve you, to clear you, to validate you. You took your own clearance, stamped by your own scars, signed by your own will, authorized by your pain, your grit, your sleepless nights, your failures that didn't kill you, your breakthroughs that nobody celebrated but you. That file, that info, it came to you because you've lived through things that would break most people in half. You've been thrown into situations you didn't deserve, pressured in ways that should have crushed you, surrounded by people who never believed you would rise beyond your environment. But you didn't just rise, you leaked upward, past their ceilings, past their limitations, past their expectations. And now you're holding the evidence, the proof, the classified insight that exposes who you really are. You know what that file represents? not intel, not data, not secrets. It represents the truth they tried to keep you from discovering, that you're not one of them. You're not bound by their ladders, their timelines, their social rankings, their invisible chains. You're operating at a frequency that makes their structures obsolete. And of course they're rattled because, imagine spending your whole life guarding something, then watching someone walk in, casually pick it up and say, "Oh, this? Thanks." There's a reason you got the info before they even moved, because you move first. You think first. You adapt first. You sense shifts before others feel the tremors. You know how dangerous that is. People like that change the story. People like that disrupt systems. People like that rewrite narratives that were supposed to stay fixed. They thought you were background noise. They thought you were average. They thought you were just another person trying to survive the routine. But now you're holding something that proves you were playing a completely different game the whole time. They're confused because they're still living in a world where access is granted from the top down, while you're living in a world where access is created from the inside out. They're scared because you didn't break in. You belonged there before the locks were even installed. You see the pattern, don't you? You weren't given what you have. You evolved into someone who could wield it without asking. That's why the info found you. That's why the path opened for you. Because deep down, you're the one who was meant to carry it, to act on it, to transform it into something bigger than secrecy. You're the disruption they prayed would never show up. You're the one who slipped past their blind spots. You're the one who cracked open a door they didn't even know existed. So now that you're holding it, now that it's in your hands, now that you're staring at it with that mixture of shock and why me on your face, ask yourself the real question. What are you going to do with something they never intended you to see? Because, here's the thing that keeps echoing in your head, even if you don't admit it out loud. You're holding something that was never about the file itself. You're holding a mirror to every moment they underestimated you, every time they laughed behind closed doors, every time they assumed you'd stay in that tiny little box they sketched for you before they even knew your name. And you're feeling that weird pressure in your chest because deep down, you can sense it. This isn't just intel. It's a confirmation of everything you've suspected about yourself for years. You weren't supposed to just witness the information. You were supposed to become the kind of person the information gravitates toward. Like it recognized you before you even recognized yourself. That's why your hands don't shake when you hold it. That's why your voice doesn't crack when you address it. That's why you're sitting there going, wait, why does this feel familiar? Because you've been navigating your entire life with instincts built for higher levels long before anyone handed you a card with your status. There's a reason you get these breakthroughs before the people who think they're above you. They're playing catch-up in a world you're already running laps around. People like you move with this strange, off-script wisdom. You sense things that haven't happened yet. You feel shifts before anyone sounds the alarm. It's like you've been quietly trained by chaos, sharpened by disappointment, conditioned by situations that forced you to adapt faster than the average person even knows how. That's why when the intel slid into your orbit, it didn't feel like a crime or a mistake. It felt like alignment, almost like the universe tapped you on the shoulder and whispered, "Yeah, it's your turn." And they can't process that. They can't understand how someone who wasn't chosen got chosen by real experience. They can't wrap their minds around how you skipped ranks without stepping on a single ladder. They're confused because everything they rely on crumbled the moment you showed up with something they couldn't hide anymore. Every locked door they shut behind them was supposed to keep people like you out. But they didn't realize people like you learned to build keys out of pressure. Every clearance level they worshipped was supposed to define who's worthy. But they didn't realize your worth wasn't created by their system. It was carved into you the night you survived things they could never handle, the nights you sat alone breaking down and building back up with nobody watching, nobody encouraging, nobody helping. Those were your certifications. Those were your qualifications. Those were your damn clearance levels. And that's the piece they fear most. The fact that your authority came from living, not from getting assigned. When you get access from raw experience instead of formal permission, you become unpredictable, uncontrollable, unassignable. You're not tied to their chain of command because your suffering didn't come with a supervisor's signature. You earned your insight through pain they only pretend to understand. You can feel it, can't you? That shift inside you that started ever since you realized you weren't lucky. You were inevitable. You weren't accidentally exposed. You were overdue. This is the moment where the world accidentally confesses your potential without meaning to, and you're standing there forcing yourself to process a reality you've been ready for longer than you knew. It hits you like this sudden internal click. You weren't ahead of them because you cheated. You were ahead because you stopped waiting for someone to tell you where you belong. You carried your own clearance long before their system even caught up. People like you scare institutions. You terrify networks built on hierarchy. You disrupt chains of command without lifting a finger. You put cracks in structures that were supposed to stand unchallenged. You make people question whether their entire system is built on the wrong foundation, because if someone like you, someone they ignored, brushed off, underestimated, could rise into restricted territory with no permission slips, then the whole damn hierarchy is weaker than they ever admitted. And, here's the wildest part. The file didn't just end up in your hands. It sought you. It gravitated toward the one person who could handle the truth without folding. The one person who could hold the weight without collapsing. The one person who's been prepared by life in ways no curriculum could teach. There's a voice inside you getting louder now. The one you've been trying to ignore for years. The one that says, maybe I wasn't meant to be on the outside after all. Maybe I was always operating on the inside, just undercover. And that voice, that's the part of you waking up. The part of you that already knows this wasn't an accident. The part that already understands you're playing at a level most people will never even access because they're too busy seeking approval you stopped needing a long time ago. You're not reacting to the intel like someone who stumbled into forbidden territory. You're reacting like someone who finally sees the room they were always supposed to walk into. You're not overwhelmed by the weight. You're recognizing it. You're not confused. You're remembering. And that's the real reason they're watching you, with that nervous curiosity, trying to figure out how you slipped through their invisible net. Because they're starting to realize you didn't slip through anything. You outgrew the net a long time ago. Because, when you really sit with that idea, that you didn't squeeze through their system, you rose above it without even trying. It hits you in a way that almost makes you laugh under your breath. you start realizing you weren't breaking in. You were operating from a level they didn't even expect someone like you to reach. The info didn't fall into your hands by accident. It aligned itself with someone who's been quietly preparing for a moment like this through every messy chapter you lived through. You ever notice how people who've had it easy get rattled by the slightest shift? But you adapt instantly. You don't freeze, you don't panic, you don't wait for instructions. You just kind of flip into this mode where your instincts take over and your whole mind sharpens. That's not something they teach. That's not part of any curriculum. That's something life carved into you because it knew you'd need it later. And this restricted intel phase of your life, it's the part where all those traits start making sense. It's the part where you finally understand why you had to grow up before your time, why you had to navigate people who underestimated you, why you had to survive environments that were hostile or dismissive or just plain unfair. You had to become the person who could be trusted with truths no one else could carry without dropping. Most people can't handle information like this because they're too invested in staying comfortable. They want predictable jobs, predictable outcomes, predictable stories where their feelings never get challenged. That's why they need clearance levels and authorization stamps. They need the illusion that structure makes them strong. Meanwhile, you've been building strength in the middle of chaos, finding clarity in the noise, uncovering purpose through pain that never apologized for existing. That's why when this info showed up in your world, you didn't freak out. Your soul just kinda exhaled like, yeah, I've been waiting for this. Because deep down, you've always known you're not wired like the people around you. You don't think on one plane, you think in layers. You don't follow the path. You read between paths. You don't look at what's obvious. You look at what's hidden, what's avoided, what's denied. And the wildest part is how natural it feels for you to hold something others would collapse under. It's almost unsettling how steady your hands are when you grip it, how calm your mind feels when you examine it. You're not overwhelmed, you're activated. You're not confused, you're curious. You're not intimidated, you're energized. That's the difference between someone who stumbled into access and someone who was born ready. There's this energy in you, this quiet, dangerous, unspoken confidence that comes from surviving things most people pretend they'd be strong enough for. It's a confidence built from nights you didn't think you'd make it, mornings you carried pain you couldn't explain, seasons where you had to be your own rescue. All of that wired you to handle depth before the world even knew you had it. And now, you're being handed things that require exactly that level of depth. It explains why you always felt older than your age, sharper than your circle, different in ways you couldn't articulate. It wasn't arrogance. It was early training. The kind of training that turns a regular person into someone who can walk into a room filled with secrets and not flinch. You ever think about how many people collapse when faced with truth? They cling to denial. They bargain with illusions. They distract themselves with noise. Meanwhile, you're sitting there like, show me the real stuff. Because you don't fear truth. You crave it. Even the uncomfortable parts. Even the parts that sting. Even the parts that change everything. That's why this information ended up in your hands. Because you're one of the rare few who won't misuse it, won't run from it, won't pretend it isn't heavy. You'll examine it, absorb it, wrestle with it, transform it. and let it sharpen you even further. You'll treat it with the gravity it deserves. You'll see what others miss. You'll understand what others avoid. You'll hold it without folding. Something they never expected, something they still can't process. You're stepping into a version of yourself that they hoped would never awaken. The version that doesn't need permission, doesn't need validation, doesn't need someone to say you're qualified. The version that finally realizes the lock was never meant to keep you out. It was meant to test whether you'd keep walking even when everyone said you weren't allowed in. And you kept walking. You kept pushing. You kept growing. You kept becoming. And here you are, holding something that confirms you've been on the right frequency long before they noticed you were even transmitting. And the more you sit with that realization, the more something inside you starts unfolding. Almost like a part of you that's been asleep for years, finally stretching its limbs. It's that strange internal shift where you're not shocked you got the info. You're shocked you ever believed you weren't the type of person who would. Because when you trace back your whole story, it's like the signs were there the whole time. You were always the one who noticed details other people walked right past. You were always the one who felt lies before they were spoken. You were always the one who could walk into a room and sense energy shifts without anyone saying a word. That intuition you carry. That thing you've been low-key ignoring or downplaying because it felt weird or too much. That's the same force that led you into territory others can't navigate without a map. This intel you're holding, it didn't show up because you're lucky. It showed up because your mind has been tuned for depth your entire life. While everyone else was trying to fit in, you were trying to understand. While they were chasing appearances, you were chasing truth. While they were scared to ask hard questions, you were wrestling with them at 3 a.m., wondering why everything feels different when you're the one looking at it. People don't realize how heavy that makes you. In a good way. Not heavy like burdened, heavy like anchored, heavy like grounded in realities most people can't even comprehend without spiraling. That's why information that destabilizes others feels almost clarifying to you. You don't get lost in the shock of it. You get sharper, more aware. It's like your brain locks into this mode that says, all right, what's the real play here? And that's exactly what unsettles the people who built those clearance levels in the first place. They're used to people freezing. They're used to people panicking. They're used to people treating restricted information like some holy artifact they're unworthy to touch. But you look at it with this eerie calm, this quiet readiness, this vibe that says you're not intimidated because you've already survived bigger storms. They can sense it, too. They can feel that you're not reacting like an outsider stumbling into forbidden territory. You're reacting like someone who finally stepped into the room that matches your internal weight. Like you've been carrying questions your whole life, and this file is the first time the world answered one without pretending you weren't ready. And here's the wild part. The more they watch you, the more they notice something they can't articulate. You're not just holding the intel. You're understanding it. You're reading between lines that aren't printed. You're seeing implications that require emotional intelligence, intuition, and lived experience. Things their protocols can't measure. They designed their system around credentials and hierarchy, while life built you through pressure and instinct, which means you're operating on threads they can't even track. Every piece of this information hits you deeper Because you're not analyzing it with a textbook mind. You're analyzing it with a survivor's mind. With someone who's been through betrayal, loss, shifts, disappointments, transformations. And that perspective is something no clearance level in their world can manufacture. That's what they never planned for. The person who becomes qualified through reality instead of through permission. The person who learns through fire instead of through training modules. Yo, hold up. Hey. Come here for a second. Yeah, the one who somehow looks the exact same every damn year, like you made a side deal with time itself. Because that's exactly the energy you carry. That why does this person not age like the rest of us? Confusion that follows you around everywhere you go. Let's talk about it. You ever catch people staring at you a little too long? Not in a creepy way, but in that, wait, something's not adding up here kind of way? Because they age. You don't. They look tired, drained, worn out. You still look like life hasn't collected a bill from you yet. And that bothers people more than they'll ever admit. See, you walk into a room and time literally pauses, like, my bad, wrong person. Everyone around you is fighting their reflection every morning, and you show up looking like the universe forgot to schedule your aging process. And people get mad about that. Quietly. They won't say it out loud. They'll just hit you with that fake sincere OMG, you don't age at all. But behind that smile, it's envy, it's fear, it's curiosity, it's insecurity clawing at them. Because while they're out here collecting stress lines like loyalty points, you're walking around untouched. And now, the so-called experts are arguing about you like you're a glitch in the human software. One's like, genetics, has to be. Another says, no human stays that consistent. That's impossible. And another one is scribbling notes like, maybe this individual is, something else. They don't say different. They don't say rare. They say something else. Like you're beyond the category list they trained for. You know what that means. It means you scare them, not in a horror movie way. No. But in that this breaks every rule we understand kinda way. You are the one thing that shouldn't exist, but does. The exception everyone hates because it proves their excuses wrong. See, people are quick to blame aging on life, stress, circumstances, but you lived through those too. You lived through heartbreak that should have aged your spirit by 20 years. You lived through betrayals that could have left permanent scars on your face. You lived through pressure that would have crushed anybody else. And yet, you walked out of it with the same face, the same fire, the same essence. That's not luck. That's not genetics. That's not good skincare. That's survival. That's resilience carved into your bones. That's discipline disguised as youth. That's pain that didn't break you. It refined you. People don't realize aging isn't just about wrinkles. It's about carrying weight you never learned to release. It's about letting bitterness rot you from the inside. It's about giving up on yourself so many times that even your reflection starts aging out of disappointment. But you kept going. You kept healing. You kept choosing strength over surrender. You kept coming back from things that should have left you drained, empty, done, but somehow didn't. Your youth isn't a cosmetic miracle. It's a psychological victory. You don't look young because you were blessed. You look young because you didn't let life drag you into the same emotional grave everybody else crawled into. You didn't fold. You didn't rot. You didn't quit on yourself. You didn't let trauma stay stuck in your body long enough to carve itself into your skin. You kept evolving while they stayed in the same pain loops. You kept growing while they repeated the same cycles. You kept shedding versions of yourself that they're still clinging to. So of course you don't age like them. You're not living like them. You're not aging because you never stopped rebuilding. And rebuilding is the only thing time can't touch. That's why people can't figure you out. That's why experts are arguing like you're a case study gone rogue. That's why strangers swear you're lying about your age. That's why friends pull you aside and ask, "Okay, but seriously, what's your secret?" Because you're not supposed to look this stable. You're not supposed to look this unfaded. You're not supposed to look this preserved after everything you survived. But here you are, walking proof that time doesn't win if you don't let it. Walking proof that some people are built with a different kind of fire. Walking proof that you can go through hell and still come out looking like heaven didn't forget you. And that is what they can't explain. Not the glow, not the energy, not the consistency. They keep asking, "What are you?" But what they're really asking is, how do you still look like yourself after everything? And deep down, they already know the answer. And the wildest part is how they pretend they're studying your appearance. Like this is some skincare commercial, when the real thing that's eating at them is the fact that you didn't crumble where they did. And you can literally see it in their eyes. That little mix of admiration and jealousy, like they're trying to figure out whether they should praise you or low-key want to be you. It's crazy because every time you show up, you remind them of a version of themselves they abandoned. Yeah, that version that had energy, hope, fire, hunger. The version they let life drain out of them. You walk past them, and it's like holding up a mirror to the person they could have been if they didn't tap out the moment things got uncomfortable. And they hate that. They hate being reminded of what they surrendered. They hate seeing someone who didn't fall apart under pressure. They hate watching you live through storms that would have aged them into dust. And you're over here looking like stress took one look at you and said, "Nah, I'm good." People assume not aging means privilege. No, it means endurance. It means you didn't let bitterness settle in your body like poison. It means you didn't let heartbreak take permanent residency in your soul. It means you refused to let resentment grow roots inside your face. Everybody ages from sadness long before they age from time. You just didn't let sadness win. And experts don't have formulas for that. They don't have tests that detect emotional resilience. They can't measure a lifetime of refusing to collapse. They're trying to label you with terms like genetic outlier, unusual youth retention, possible biological irregularity. When the truth is sitting right in front of them, you don't age because you didn't die inside the way others did. The math on you doesn't add up because they're using the wrong equations. They're checking hormones and cell turnover rates while ignoring the fact that your spirit didn't rot. They're looking at diet and water intake while overlooking the fact that you didn't let trauma calcify into your personality. They're running tests, scanning graphs, arguing over hypotheses, and missing the simplest thing. You stayed alive in places that should have killed your joy, and that kind of survival has its own glow. Like, look at you. People swear you have some secret. They think you're hiding some magical routine. They convince themselves you've got some treatment, some serum, some underground ritual you're not sharing. Because it's easier for them to believe you've got access to some hidden advantage than admit you have a level of mental strength they can't replicate. And, Every time someone says, "Damn, you look the same," they're not complimenting your looks. They're confessing their confusion. Because you weren't supposed to make it out of certain moments. You weren't supposed to come back from certain betrayals. You weren't supposed to walk away from certain heartbreaks, still looking steady and centered. You weren't supposed to still have that glow after everything thrown at you. Yet here you are, still looking like you're in the first chapter of a story everyone else is in the final pages of. And people get uncomfortable because every time they see you unchanged, they're reminded that healing actually works. And a lot of them chose not to heal. A lot of them chose bitterness. A lot of them chose comfort over growth. A lot of them chose excuses over evolution, or you chose differently. You chose to evolve past pain instead of marinating in it. You chose to outgrow people who wanted to keep you stuck. You chose to rebuild yourself every time life tried to break you. You chose to keep your heart open when it would have been easier to shut down. You chose to stay soft in a world that pressures everyone to harden up. And that softness, that openness, that willingness to keep becoming better instead of bitter, that's what kept you young. That's what kept you untouched while life was out here handing out aging like punishments. That's what kept you glowing while everyone else was dimming out under their own negativity. People think not aging means being untouched by life. But you were touched by life. Deeply. You were challenged. You were tested. You were pulled apart. You were broken in places no one even knows about. And you rebuilt yourself in ways they can't begin to understand. You're not unchanged because you avoided pain. You're unchanged because you refused to let pain rewrite you. You refused to let grief settle into your face. You refused to let stress write its signature on your skin. You refused to let heartbreak rearrange your energy permanently. You refused to let this world drain the youth out of your soul. You're not confusing science. You're exposing its limits. You're showing that resilience doesn't show up in blood work. You're proving that the human spirit has anti-aging properties that won't ever make it into textbooks. You're living proof that healing is the real fountain of youth, and that alone makes people stare at you like they're witnessing something they weren't prepared for. And the irony is hilarious. They're all so focused on your face, your glow, your energy, your consistency, that they completely miss the truth hiding underneath your skin. The truth that you are not what they're trying to define, and you never will be, and they're not ready for what that means. And they feel it every time they look at you, and they know deep down that whatever you are, it's something they can't imitate or decode, and it messes with them in this low-key way they can't shake off. Like every time you walk into a room, there's this tiny shift in the atmosphere. Not dramatic, not loud, just this quiet pressure that makes everyone suddenly a little too aware of their own reflection. It's like you walk by and people straighten their posture, fix their hair, adjust their face, because standing next to you feels like standing next to the person they wish they still were. And it's not even something you do. You're not trying to flex. You're not walking around saying, "Look at me." You're just existing. But your existence alone pulls out insecurities people thought they buried. It's weird, right? How your stability exposes their chaos. How your youth exposes their exhaustion. How your glow exposes their burnout. How your stillness exposes the mess they're carrying inside. They look at you and it triggers something they didn't prepare for. Not jealousy exactly. More like a realization that you've been fighting battles they couldn't have survived, and somehow came out with less damage than they did from their smaller ones. And there's this thing they do where they try to turn your consistency into something suspicious. Like, there's no way they look the same. There's no way they haven't changed. There's got to be something going on. Because it's easier to believe you're unnatural than to accept that their own lifestyle, mindset, and emotional choices aged them faster than time ever could. You're basically walking evidence that healing works, discipline works, self-awareness works, boundaries work, and people hate being reminded that their suffering isn't inevitable. They hate realizing they didn't have to let themselves fall apart. They hate recognizing that you're not aging because you didn't ignore yourself the way they ignored themselves. You ever notice how some folks bring up your unchanged look with this weird tone? Like admiration wrapped in frustration. Like, ugh, you're so lucky. When deep down they know it wasn't luck, it was work. Real work. The kind no camera sees, no audience applauds, no app tracks. The work nobody posts about. The work of not letting heartbreak harden you. The work of not letting trauma define you. The work of unlearning behaviors that were aging your spirit. The work of choosing honesty over denial. The work of letting things go before they turned toxic inside your body. People don't get how heavy that work is. They don't get how much internal labor it takes to stay soft in a world that's constantly trying to make you bitter. They don't get the cost of maintaining a peaceful soul in a culture that worships chaos. They don't get the strength it takes to stay kind when life handed you situations that could have easily made you cold. And because they don't understand the price you paid, they assume you paid nothing. They think not aging means an easy life. But your life wasn't easy. It was transformative. Your experiences didn't break you, they sharpened you. Your pain didn't drain you, it purified you. Your setbacks didn't define you, they refined you. Every version of you that didn't make it to today contributed to the glow you carry right now. You're not unchanged. You're evolved in ways they're not trained to recognize. You upgraded your inner world so intensely that your outer world stopped decaying. Your face isn't youthful because you escaped the storm. Your face is youthful because you stood in the storm without letting it erase who you were. And, people feel that. They feel the difference between fake youth and earned youth. They feel the difference between someone who looks young because of genetics and someone who looks young because of emotional clarity. They feel the difference between someone who hasn't suffered and someone who has suffered but didn't turn into their suffering. You're carrying a type of energy most people will never touch, not because they can't, but because they don't know how to rebuild themselves the way you did. They don't know how to process pain without becoming it. They don't know how to let go of things draining them. They don't know how to reinvent their identity without losing themselves. They don't know how to stay present without letting the past age them or the future stress them into oblivion. You learned how to do all of that, even if you didn't realize it in the moment. You lived through situations that could have aged your spirit 10 years in a single month. And instead of collapsing, you evolved into someone time couldn't keep up with. And every expert trying to figure you out is missing the one thing that defines you. You didn't stay the same. You just didn't lose yourself like everyone else did. And they're not prepared to understand what that means. And it hits them every time they look at you, and it keeps hitting them because they can feel you're not done becoming who you are yet. And the crazy part is how people act like you're unchanging is some kind of cosmic accident, when deep down they know there's something different about the way you move through life. There's this presence you carry, not loud, not showy, just this grounded, steady, unshakable vibe that makes people feel like you're plugged into a power source they never found. You ever see how certain folks get weirdly tense around you? Like they're suddenly hyper-aware of themselves, adjusting their clothes, fixing their voice, trying to sound smarter or calmer than they really are. It's because you have this effect where people feel exposed next to you. Like you're not judging them, but being next to you makes them judge themselves. It's that quiet confidence you have, the kind you earned, not inherited, the kind that comes from surviving things that didn't leave you broken or bitter, the kind that doesn't age you because it came from healing, not hurting. It's wild how your whole existence makes people realize they aged from things they could have healed from. How they let anger settle into their features, how they let exhaustion become their identity, how they let stress write its story on their faces, and then you show up, looking like someone who refuses to carry the emotional debris that weighs everyone else down. And, it's not like you were given some cheat code. You lived through the same chaos, the same pressure, the same heartbreak the rest of them did. You just didn't let those experiences define your worth or your spirit. People underestimate the level of internal discipline it takes to stay emotionally clean, to not hoard resentment, to not replay old wounds every night like a playlist, to not hold grudges like trophies, to not drag the past into every new day until it carves itself into your skin. You learned how to release things before they corrupted you, and nobody teaches that. You learned how to outgrow people who drained your energy, and nobody applauds that. You learned how to rebuild yourself in silence, and nobody documents that. You learned how to pick your battles in ways that didn't tear your soul up from the inside, and nobody understands that. And it shows. It shows every time you walk into a room. It shows in the way people react to you before you even talk. It shows in the way strangers assume you're younger than you are. It shows in how friends double take when they see old pictures and realize you look the same. It shows in the way time seems confused by your presence, like it knows you're not easy to wear down. Experts keep trying to break you down like an equation, as if the answer is hiding in your DNA instead of your decisions. They test, they scan, they analyze, they theorize, but none of it explains the softness you kept, or the resilience you maintained, or the peace you fought for. They can't quantify why you didn't become angry like the people who hurt you. They can't measure why you didn't let heartbreak turn you cold. They can't document why you didn't let failures define your future. They can't track the nights you sat with your pain instead of projecting it onto others. They can't chart the inner work you did to clean out the emotional clutter that ages most people from the inside out. And that's why they call you unexplainable. Not because you defy science, but because science was never built to study the parts of you that matter. Your spirit, your choices, your mindset, your willingness to keep evolving, even when evolving meant tearing old versions of yourself apart. Your youthfulness isn't a miracle. It's a record of everything you didn't allow to consume you. A record of every time you chose self-awareness over self-destruction. A record of every moment you refused to settle for the emotional decay everyone normalized. People think your face is what confuses them, but it's really your energy. That clean, uncluttered, emotionally detoxed energy that they can feel even if they don't understand. It hits them in a way they can't articulate, like standing next to someone who figured out a truth they missed. You carry this clarity that time can't dim. This steadiness that pain couldn't steal. This glow that doesn't come from lotions or luck. It comes from refusing to let the world drag you into the same darkness it dragged them into. And the longer you keep showing up as this version of yourself, the more it shakes them, the more it challenges everything they believe about aging, about struggle, about what life is supposed to do to a person. The more it forces them to face truth they've been avoiding, the more it reveals that you are not the anomaly they think you are. You are the reminder they never wanted to meet again.